So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay on the test build of the new patch, which of course is heartening to see because it means that the new update is marching ever closer. Certainly it's far closer now, it feels, than it has been for quite a long time, with all of these new maps, new siege battles, new general showcases that I'm being permitted to show now. Means that we shouldn't have to wait too long for a more general release of this now. And obviously with each one of these showcases I get to show as well, we get to see occasionally new factions, new units and the like, and on this occasion we will see a somewhat generalised new mechanic which will be available in the game now. We'll get to that in just a moment. There is a sort of weird workaround that they've had to do to make this happen, but essentially mirror matches are now going to be possible, but it is in a slightly strange and offbeat kind of way, in the same vein, I suppose, in the way that 8-way free-for-alls were discovered to be possible. There's another, not the same kind of workaround, but a similar sort of feel of a workaround to this at the very least, but we'll get onto that in just a moment. This is also a map that was made by the Womb Raider, or GOC James as he is called on Discord. It's not the first map that he's made, but it's probably the first one that I'm going to be showing of the two that he sent, purely because this is on the test build of the new patch, and obviously I do want to give a little bit more of a priority to stuff that's on the new patch, because obviously more showcases for a good. But there will be another one of the maps that he has made, which was run on the old version of the game, which will almost certainly be coming out in the next couple of weeks or so as well. This one though, a little bit more of a standardized cityscape map feeling to it, this, with the river running through the middle of it. There are a few maps which tend to have this kind of structure to them. The river itself can prove to be just as much of an obstacle to the defenders as it can be to the attackers if the defenders don't set themselves up correctly, but it does offer them more choke points to utilise as well. But yes, a Runic inspired map, this one. And speaking of which, Rhun is going to be where we see the mirror match mechanics coming into play here, because there are going to be 2 Runic armies on the defence and 2 Runic armies on the attack. Now in the past we have seen partial mirror matches with the likes of Umbar and Numenor facing off against one another, but on this occasion Rhun, some of them at the very least, have been tempted into breaking their ties with Sauron, and they're going to be marching alongside Erebor, the kingdom under the mountain. 2 armies of dwarves marching towards this Runic port. And just before we get into the army compositions, we will see how they have made this work, because as I'm sure you can see here, it says Kingdom of Dale, but it is the Runic units here. So that's how this has been made possible. Essentially, according to the game at the very least, it's going to be 2 Dalian armies that are on the attack with Erebor, but in reality, with the units that you can see here, it's actually going to be Rhun. So weird. It's kind of a strange workaround when you think about it that way. You're kind of fooling the game in many ways, but it's an old game at this point, so these kinds of strange and janky workarounds do exist. But we shall go through one of the Erebor armies first and foremost. Erebor, I think, are a faction where you're not going to see too much in the way of changes, because being a heavy infantry focused faction as they are, the differences between them and Khazad-dûm are already fairly clearly defined, so you may see a few minor changes to their roster, but overall I would suggest Erebor and Khazad-dûm, for that matter, probably going to be 2 of the least changed factions that the game has to offer, especially seeing as anything new and Dwarven is probably going to be bound up within RHUNIC, of course. Portaleno, though, does have some Obsidian Guard, which is where his general is today, and having that extra melee defense with a little bit of extra damage should serve them pretty well against the likes of Khand and Rhun, who they're going to be facing off against within the settlement itself. Plenty of units of the Ironfoot Warriors as well. Standard Dwarven infantry always tends to be pretty efficient. I mean, the dwarves in general are fairly slow moving as an entity, and that won't be changing, but as soon as they get bogged down into a melee engagement, that's where they're most at home, and even their most basic units can really punch above their weight class when it comes to that sort of thing. They will be a little bit concerned about the armour piercing that can be brought to bear by particularly the Variags and the Easterlings that are on the defence today, but overall it's still going to be a net positive for the dwarves to have this level of standard infantry to work with. A couple of units of the Sons of Durin, you can see that they have been revised downwards a little bit in terms of the units that they are. They are now merely a high-end unit of shock infantry, with 123 men in the unit. They're still going to be very expensive, but they're no longer a bodyguard tier unit. I think this is probably for the best as well, because the dwarves, it used to be that pretty much every time you saw them, they would always bring 4 or 5 units of bodyguard tier infantry / ranged units, and it would become very, very samey. So to diversify their roster a little bit by spreading out the strength a little bit and also making some units a little bit more standard in nature, I think should be a good thing overall for the mechanics of their faction. And actually, I think it may end up being a thing that makes them stronger as well, because many a player would fall into the trap of having armies far too small and being far too greedy with their bodyguard tier units. But this is not going to be too much of a problem now, with the Sons of Durin being a little bit more standard. We have the Dragon Slayers, who still are, of course, a bodyguard tier unit, still armor piercing, I believe, as well. So this is where their highest end armor piercing is now going to be coming from exclusively. Shielded infantry, of course, as well. When it comes to shielded bodyguard tier infantry, the dwarves really are more or less in a class of their own. There are a few examples of elven units which can also count themselves among this number, but generally speaking, the elves invest their bodyguard units elsewhere. This is much more of a dwarven style. Ironfoot crossbows as well. Of course, we've already seen RHUNIC with their slightly more ranged focused dwarven faction as they are, and then Khazad-dûm, of course, don't have access to the crossbows, but Erebor very much going all in for this sort of thing alongside the Ironfoot axe throwers that you see next to them as well. All about that mid to close range punch, doing a lot of damage very, very quickly. It does mean that you are a little bit vulnerable at long range, as you always were with Erebor. You are going to need to close the gap pretty fast, but as soon as you get situated, that's where Erebor really can be at their devastating best. Erebor Legionaries are a higher tier unit of line infantry than the Ironfoot Warriors we've already seen, and really very little that Rhun, Khand or Mordor, or all of the defensive factions have today, can go toe-to-toe with them in that class of unit anyway. Obviously all of them have got bodyguard units that can, and surpass them indeed, but again, very much that sort of dwarven style there. And then Ironfoot Pikes as well, and you can see here another little difference that has been added to the Ironfoot Pikes. They are now one of the shielded pikes in the game, so no longer is it an extremely rare type of unit, which is a shielded pike now. And obviously with dwarves as well, that really does help them lock down a front line, because in the past, one way to try and deal with the dwarven phalanx would have still been arrow fire in spite of their thick armour. But with the addition of those shields, it becomes a little bit more difficult to do that. You're going to have to rely on straight up armour piercing options at range like crossbow bolts and javelins. But yes, 3 units of those Ironfoot pikes. Interesting to see how they get on with the kind of range pressure they will be under. The first of the attacking Runic armies then, under the command of Hidden, we have the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen. Assassin class units in general should be a little bit stronger in this new version of the game, and the Guildsmen on both sides of the conflict today will have the opportunity to prove that. We also have some E-Strong crossbows with the armour upgrade here as well. Nothing is going to be that different about them. We all know the strengths of crossbows. When it comes to the E-Strong crossbows as well, even with the armour upgrades, we all know about their weaknesses as well. They're not quite as sturdy as the Dwarven ones at range. Just in front of them, the Gamp Rim. The Gamp Rim and Flag Rim really do represent some of the very few units which have remained completely unchanged from vanilla 3rd Age at this point. Mechanically they've changed, of course, but stylistically and name-wise they have not. And there's a good reason for that. I mean, they put a lot of effort into these models back in the day, and they still hold up next to all of the newer offerings that people have as well. An armour-piercing phalanx will be very useful, of course, and pikes are going to be very limited. Erebor, the only faction on display today which has access to such things. Flag Rim as well, armour-piercing, going back and forth. I mean, it's probably going to be more important for the defenders here today, but still, it will offer both sides a bit of extra bite. The Scion Rim offer that really heavy unit of spears on the front line, and defensively they can actually keep pace with quite a few of the Dwarven units they're going to be fighting alongside today. So very much a heavy metal approach potentially for the attackers. The Cummel's Dragon Knights, I mean, there are more open areas out in the dunes on this one. As the battle enters and sort of focuses down more on the centre of the settlement, the cavalry is going to become less important, I think, but early on the Dragon Knights could be really, really useful. Scion Rim here as well. Bit of a change as well. What used to be the entry-level dual-wielding unit are now called the Carmul's Immortals. Stats-wise, we'll get more into that when the patch actually releases and we start going through faction overviews, but of course they look a little bit more impressive now. They do stand out a little bit, but the lack of a shield is still ultimately going to be a bit of a problem if archers do get a hold of them. Carmul's Immortals, Flag Rim. We've got the upgraded Balkoth Tribesmen here as well. Basic javelins, very useful for attacking forces, as they always were. The Nar Rim offering a little bit of support as well. and the slightly changed model now for the Carmel's Chosen, which I think they look fantastic now, actually, and certainly more regal. I don't know stats-wise how they compare to other units of a similar type. I think the main difference is their unit count has been revised upwards, so it makes them a little bit more useful. It brings them more into line with Royal Legion of Armenelos, Goblin Kingsguard, that sort of thing. Though quality-wise, I think they sit in the middle of those two still, but still, very useful bodyguard tier unit there. Moving on, we have Filler, who has also got Carmel's Immortals. I don't think the Dragon's Breath has mechanically changed all that much. This is the kind of map where, just by its very presence, it's going to dictate where the defenders can set up shop, but other than that I don't know how useful it's going to be. We'll see. It's also one of the only examples of a unit which actually had an artillery crew, which was different in the last patch as well, so they're going to be able to muck in melee as well. Flag Rim, Scion Rim, Gamp Rim, unsurprisingly. We've got the strong crossbows, another unit of the very snazzy new Carmel's Chosen. Dragon's Wrath crossbows are going to be an interesting one. Interesting to see how their split shot rounds at close range, almost like ye-old shotguns, behave now. That was how they used to be in an older version of the game, but it couldn't really be made to work, so they shared the body-piercing bolts of the Black Locks. I think that has been changed back now, though, so maybe they have improved upon it. We have the Sapphire Bladesmen and the Tribesmen as well, so the high-end javelins along with the regular ones. And finally, the other Dwarven army under the command of Y2K86. He has also got the newly shielded Ironfoot pikes backed up by a lot of these Ironfoot warriors and Erebor legionaries. So that classic heavy infantry with pikes to anchor them in place. The Ironfoot axe throwers, who should be really good as the map contracts into the centre of the settlement as well. Here are the Blacklock Engineers, who I believe have retained their body-piercing bolts. It makes them a bit of a rarity in the game now as a foot-bound skirmisher that has access to that sort of thing. Though in the past, Rangers were always far easier to use than this unit, so overpowered they were not and are not, I believe. We also have some Ironfoot crossbows over here, and up on the high ground, Obsidian Guard, Dragon Slayers, so very similar armies this, only with Dwarven Miners and Blacklocks over here, whereas over on the other side of the field a little bit more in terms of infantry to get their teeth into. Now then, for the defenders, starting off with the Wound Raider, the map creator himself, who's playing as one of the defending Runic armies, the Dragon's Wrath crossbows with those split shot rounds, splinter shot I guess you could call it, going to be potentially really useful in the settlement as well. Some unupgraded crossbows, some Gnar Rim. Rhun as a roster, they've had some stylistic changes, but mechanically they've always been one of the more well-rounded factions, so I can't imagine we're actually going to see that much in the way of differences from them at the very least. We do have the Shadow Guard, the Scion Rim, the Gamp Rim, there's more of the Carmel's Immortals over here. I think the main thing to keep an eye on here will be the performance of the Guildsmen, just because this class of unit was always extremely difficult to use in the last version of the game. They should be far stronger now. At the back end of the settlement we have Medexa playing as Mordor. Mordor, of course, we've seen somewhat recently in their heroic defence of Cirith Ungol, which they just about came out on top of over the Gondorians. Now, will they manage to keep their underlings in line? Will Rhun be brought back to heel completely? Orc Javelins, Uruk Archers, we've got Uruk Infantry, numbers on the defence for Mordor. Very important last time, and they do offer the same sort of service here alongside their minions. There are some Uruk Halberds in there as well, which performed really well in the last battle that we saw, though they will, even with their armour piercing, I think they will struggle a little bit more against the Dwarven armies given the amount of pikes. And obviously Rhun have got the armour piercing as well to be able to go toe to toe with them, the Gamp Rim being stronger. Temple Guard with some armour piercing arrow fire, always going to be a welcome addition, especially when it comes to trying to counteract a Dwarven advance. The Morgul Chosen offering that more solid frontline unit, though again they will be outclassed by certain units on the attack today. Temple Executioners, the Olag High were very effective when we saw them last, which is interesting given the changes overall to the numbers of trolls that are permitted on the field, but the Olag High is still showing why they are the front runners in that regard, I think, though I will be a little bit cautious about that until I've actually seen the finalised stat sheets. Then we have Zelhain playing as Khand. I don't think we've actually seen the Variags of Khand too much in this version of the game, but again, much like Rhun, I would suggest that as a faction, infantry-wise at the very least, they're probably not going to have changed all that much. One thing that I will say is that the cavalry changes are likely to have affected them a lot, but in a battle like this, I think we're going to be seeing Khand as they used to be in the last version of the game. again, essentially, with Nurad footmen. Armour piercing with a little bit of a focus. Brotherhood of the Spear, a very nice defensive unit of spears. Got nomadic marauders in there as well. Brotherhood of the Axe for that little bit more of an aggressive melee edge. Variag warriors should be pretty good actually against the entry-level runic units that are up against them, but they will struggle without any armour piercing to get through the sheer armour values that the dwarves are bringing to the table. Nomadic archers have got more in their unit count now, which should make them the force they always should have been, a very effective heavy archer, so that will help them foot skirmishing wise, which is something Khand were already pretty solid at. They've already got the Nurad halberds, of course, to help anchor their lines in place. Halberds are what pretty much every faction on the field here traffic in, other than Erebor today, with those pikes of theirs. Nomadic marauders, one of the better choices of units for trying to deal with them, though. Armour piercing at range, some Variag bowmen as well. So, I mean, if they can really dig in, their archers can do a decent amount of damage here. We'll see if Rhun and Erebor can withstand that kind of punishment. More footmen with that armour piercing, more archers and footmen and bowmen on the front line as well. So, Khand ready to receive the attackers, although their allies will need to get into position maybe a little bit faster with the final defending runic army under the command of 2x over here with Carmel's Immortals. We've got some Narim once again, some crossbows going for a little bit more of a ranged focus, perhaps with a couple of archers, a couple of crossbows. Don't know if he's got any javelins, we'll get on to that though. Gamprim and Flagrim once again being the standardised runic front line. Much like Isengard, you can always rely on Rhun to have access to their main line infantry unit with the associated polearm. It's something you're always going to see in some capacity, and it looks as though 2x has gone as heavy into that as he possibly can, with the Scion Rim as well to offer that extra defensive edge. And then we've got a couple of units of Balkoth Tribesmen as well. The Guildsmen, another ranged unit of course with those throwing projectiles of theirs. More crossbowmen, and of course the snazzy looking Carmel's Chosen as well. So there will be a little bit of a cut, I think, although how much of one really depends on whether the frontal runic army wants to attack Khand immediately. I'd be tempted to, given the fact that the other defenders are not quite in place yet. They should be able to get into place, but maybe just unsettling the defenders a bit is the play here. We'll see. There's also the small matter of the cavalry that the attackers have. How will they utilise them early? So yeah, I'll rejoin when the battle is getting underway. Perhaps not too surprising to see a rather girthy grace period on this occasion, with the Ironfoot axe throwers being the first, it would appear, to take a little bit of damage at the hands of these Narim. Crossbows also moving in, so yes, the Wound Raiders army has managed to get back into a defensive position, and the dwarves will be attacking via this direction. You can also see the Carmel's Dragon Knights syncing up with that on the other side as well, albeit getting a decent charge off in this kind of space is not going to be the easiest thing, even against a unit like the Carmel's Immortals, where a good charge would be very, very useful. Under normal situations, it is fairly easy to see where the front line sits when Rhun are involved from far away, but that may not be the case anymore, considering both lines may very well be made up of many golden units, with Khand taking on the front. However, the purple and gold will at least offset one another quite nicely. They're going to be moving forward. The Dragon's Breath cannon going to make life a little bit more difficult for Khand to try and get situated here on this front line at the very least. Some of these buildings already covered by the sand. The sandstorm does add something to this map as well, I think. And the Narim continuing to fire as well. So Rhun versus Rhun is definitely going to happen over on this side. There's plenty of ways into this settlement as well, which is rather interesting to see. It does look as though Portolano's Dwarven army is going to be going right around the back and is going to be clashing with Mordor and Medexa, who's guarding the rear of the settlement, Rhun guarding the two flanks, and Khand up front. Is going to be how this is organised. Balkoth Tribesmen moving forwards, going to make the attempt at softening Khand up, and Khand realising this maybe a little bit later than would have been ideal. Maybe one volley will be released before the Variag warriors can charge in. Obviously Balkoth Tribesmen, even with the armour upgrade, they are not very good melee combatants at all, especially not when you're talking about dealing with, albeit a more basic unit of shock infantry in the form of the Variag warriors. Scion Rim on the other hand, that armour very, very useful at trying to mitigate the damage from a unit of basic swordsmen. The Manic Archer's still not going to be shooting at the moment. As we cross over the river, the water is only really going to be coming into direct focus in this engagement, I think, considering reinforcements will find it a little bit more difficult to get over to assist the Wound Raider, and more to the point, if the dwarves are victorious against Rhun over here in the long run, the dwarves will then have to contend with crossing over the river that bisects the settlement. Iron for Axe Throwers, targeting down the Guildsman, a unit we were very interested in seeing the performance of, but caught out in the open there. Definitely one of the better targets for a unit of Axe Throwers as well, given their slightly lighter nature overall. And these miners are not really going to achieve much of anything than our rim in close proximity. And once again, we're seeing the Carmel's Immortals twinned with the Scion Rim as the front line, and they should complement one another rather nicely. Cost effectiveness from the Immortals, and then really solid defensive values from the Scion Rim. Moving over here, a little bit more of a comprehensive engagement over here. Filler coming forward with something a little bit more serious right from the off here. The Carmel's Chosen will definitely give pause to units like the Nurad Footmen in spite of that armour piercing that they do have. But this does of course mean that there is a very good target for the Javelins moving forward as well. But Halberds, this does force the hand of the defenders somewhat. It means that Khand are going to have to commit far more to this frontline engagement if they wish to hold on to it. They do have plenty of reinforcements nearby should they feel the need to commit them, and Filler's reinforcements are a little bit further away, so he does need this to work out. He does still have a little bit more he can commit to start with at the very least, but it is a dangerous game to play. And Zelhane will still be quite grateful for the easy choice of target as well from such units. And here we can see the first example of an area where we can only really tell where the front line is based upon which direction the units are facing. Two units of Carmel's Immortals from both sides facing off against one another. And then we also have the Scion Rim. Should give the edge to the defending line so far. And once again it's going to be Immortals and Scion Rim from both sides this time. Erebor doesn't look like they're not quite ready to make the play against Mordor just yet, trying to organise their army just so, and then try and smash Mordor to bits. Easier said than done. We saw in the last update battle replayed the potential strengths of Mordor, though you would still back Erebor in a straight up tussle with them. Miners still standing. That's something, I suppose. They haven't routed off completely yet, and it does buy them a little bit more time with a blob to shoot at for these Iron for Axe Throwers. Already mentioned how close to mid-range skirmishing is really all Erebor have the option to do, but when they're in a settlement like this, that can be to their great benefit. Iron for Axe Throwers against Guildsmen, when it comes to a melee clash between the two, you would back the Guildsmen even in the old version of the game. They're designed with more of a melee combat edge in mind, though the Axe Throwers' armour may give them a little bit more of an edge, and of course more numbers in the unit as well. More dwarves moving forward, one unit of miners breaks, another unit sent forward to replace them. Not a huge amount of damage done. When I say that, there's a fair few of the Carmel's Immortals that have fallen, though I do feel as though a decent portion of them was down to the Iron for Axe Throwers. Scion Rim, far more resilient to that sort of thing, and there are far fewer of them that lie dead on the floor. This still represents the bloodiest engagement that we've seen so far on the field. Again, still got those Gamp Rim, but so far I think Khand will be the happier with this engagement, seeing the fact that the Carmel's Chosen have largely expended themselves already, and Rhun haven't really made much in the way of progress. Khand still look fairly comfortable on this front line. That is perhaps a worrying sign for the attackers if one of their armies starts to fizzle out early. Dragon's Breath Cannon, though, could turn things around pretty quickly. I mean, going through the back of their own men is a risky thing, but morale from both sides will be called into question here. Neither one of these two generally should have a big morale advantage over the other, though if I were to bring my own biases into it, I tend to see canned route more than Rhun. So maybe the artillery can do the business there, although with the assistance of those javelins, several of these runic units are still eager for the fight. More flag rim moving forward. I think, though, the armour piercing will probably be a little bit more effective from canned towards Rhun than the other way around. I believe Rhun's armour values are slightly higher. Well, that's how it was in the old patch. I've got to try and get that out of my head. Meanwhile, see over here on this bridge, the Balkoth tribesmen throwing a few javelins in, but some arrow volleys have clearly taken their toll on the runic javelins over here, and Hidden, of course, has got 2 routes that they need to take up into the settlement, so it's not going to be quite so easy for him to commit overwhelming force to any engagement. Indeed, over here, in this rather confusing front line, it must be said, Hidden's army is still not making a huge amount of progress. I mean, the Dragon Knights are circling, but there's really going to be no way through. A combination of Scion Rim and Gamprim are on this front line, so it's not really going to work out for them. There's a small matter of crossbows. There's plenty of reinforcements in behind here for the defenders, so I think the defenders are going to be pretty pleased with how things have gone so far. Mordor and Erebor now also facing off against one another. Erebor got themselves set, and now they have moved forward in double quick time, although moving into the jaws of this defence is going to be costly for them. Uruk archers on one side, Orc javelins on the other. There's also a little bit of support coming in from the flaming shot from the Nar Rim as well. We keep saying that the dwarves do have a tendency to be able to absorb more regular arrow fire than many other factions, but it will still do the business in this kind of scenario. And for pikes, those shields will be called into service perhaps now more than ever. Front line, Uruk infantry doing quite well for themselves. I mean, most of these Dwarven units are a little bit more defensive in nature, even the Erebor legionaries, as high tier as they are, which does perhaps make this the best time for these Olag-hai to be wading into battle, trying to put a real dent in the Dwarven numbers that are already here. Further back, there are Dragon Slayers that are potentially going to come forward. They would certainly make for excellent troll killers. It does look as though that unit of javelins has run its ammunition supply dry, so at least the dwarves don't have to continue to take that kind of damage, although there's still some armour piercing damage coming forth from the Temple Guard, which are up on the hill. And they're going after the Obsidian Guard, trying to cut down on that dwarven quality. I mean, the dwarves struggling a little bit for numbers on this front line, and the damage at range, the damage spike in melee that the Olag-hai offers, and the sheer numbers of the rest of the orcs, proving to be a winning combination both in the last battle and so far in this one for Mordor, both in a defensive sense as well, which is something we see perhaps a little bit more rarely. Of course, being attacked from every angle does mean that the possibility of a final stand location may be somewhat fluid depending upon where the attackers start to make up some ground. It does look as though Phil is starting to take Cand to task a little bit more on the front line. More runic units coming forward, and some of the Candish elements looking to rouse, albeit it is the out of ammo javelin, so not the most important unit, but all these numbers are still going to be very important to Rhun, or to Cand I should say. Technically to Rhun as well, if Rhun can break them. These strong crossbows in place in the flag rim. Hidden those Carmel's Immortals there. Another unit of tribesmen moving forwards now. Going to try and skirmish perhaps, but out of ammunition Variag Bowmen can be used as just blocking infantry essentially, preventing the tribesmen from shooting the rest of Hidden's army going up against their runic brethren. And still not making a huge amount of inroads. Flaming shot being utilised, but not really with the best of angles either. I think 2 times will be quite pleased with how the engagement has gone so far over here. And then there's a small matter of this force over here, which the dwarves being sent packing almost completely out of the settlement, which is always a bad sign when you're the attackers. I mean, I think Y2K's reinforcements are a little bit too far away for my liking. It means he was always going to have to commit his units in drips and drabs, and very often we've seen in the past the attackers be really taken to task as a result of that. And you can't really be doing this sort of thing against a faction like Rhun if you're the dwarves. Rhun have got the armour piercing necessary to be really quite efficient against individual units like this if this is how you choose to send them in. Maybe a little bit of a fractured approach from the attackers here. All of the attackers having a slightly different technique for going about their business, and again, that's something else that we have seen the attackers suffer from in the past. Ironfoot warriors are broken and fighting to the death. A rear charge from the Shadow Guard. So yeah, the Wound Raider will be pleased, I think, with how this has gone thus far. Once again, the armour piercing the key. And it's not even as if having those reinforcements too far away has really gained them anything. Hiding them behind the building would have been a better call, I think. As it is, you're going to have to go up that hill at some point. If you'd done it earlier, it wouldn't have been too much of a problem, but now you're going to be getting strafed by the Gnar Rim, regardless of what you do. And that's going to just be a little bit of extra efficiency from them. Meanwhile, the Dwarves starting to have an impact, however, with their sheer quality on the front line against the Mordor Uruks. And then Gnar Rim moving in. I mean, you can see the Sons of Durin coming forward in numbers as well, so all of a sudden they've gone from having mostly defensive units on the front line to having plenty of armour piercing, plenty of baseline attack score. Olag High still standing, though I don't know for how much longer that is going to be the case. At the back, Ironfoot warriors on the march to help reinforce things, and Portaleno still has a decent number of units in reserve as well, and the more progress they can make here, maybe that will trickle through to the other attacks as well. Perhaps not too surprising to see the two more aggressive front lines, with this one and the Runic one facing off against Khand at the front, are the ones that are making a little bit more progress than the ones on the two flanks, but obviously this will come at a cost, in particular for Filla's army, which is already looking a little bit thin on the ground, considering we're not even at the halfway point of the battle yet. Top of the hill, nomadic archers still firing away. Brotherhood of the Spear represent a good unit to try and shore up this front line to keep Khand in the fight for just that little bit longer. And then Variag Bowman as well, almost point blank. Murad Halberds turning around now, hidden, seeing an opportunity maybe to try and keep some of these units tied up over here, give Filla the opportunity to continue his forward march. But it is only a unit of Carmel's Immortals, and you would still back the Nurad Footman in this particular fight. Further back as well, Nurad Footman, still a unit of reinforcements if necessary. Just trying to keep their attention though. Sapphire Bladesmen, Javelins could be just the thing against a unit like the Brotherhood of the Spear, but you can see that with the addition of these slightly stronger units and some more swordsmen, the Runic Assault does seem to be petering out, and there's not really anything left in terms of reinforcements that Filla can commit forward, unless he were to forego using the Javelins and try and use the Sapphire Bladesmen as infantry right from the off, though that isn't desirable, and you can tell that's the case because Khand are trying to force that eventuality by any means. Variag warriors immediately routing, however. This defensive position over here, however, still pretty comfortable. Dwarven miners taking point blank hits from the assassins just wanting to hemorrhage the Dwarven manpower just that little bit more, even against the lowliest of Dwarven forces. The Ironfoot crossbows stood there rather gormlessly, wanting to utilise their crossbows. There's also the small matter of the Blacklock Engineers, but these are all ranged units, so Rhun can be pretty much, other than that one unit of Ironfoot warriors, Rhun can be pretty safe in the fact that they're not going to be receiving an attack the likes of which the north and south of the settlement have had to deal with, which means that you can afford to be a little bit more subtle with your movements, rather than just committing everything forwards in one big go. Speaking of which, the first defensive position to completely fall, and perhaps the only one for the time being, is this one in the north of the settlement. Portaleno's Dwarven army will now be able to move further forwards, but Mordor still not done yet. They still have a whole section of their army, including stuff like Temple Executioners and Morgul Chosen, but it's not the best of Mordor forces, this. They do have some strong units, but many of the things they have left is stuff like fodder and javelins, so This perhaps the weak link so far in this defensive force. So with Dragon's Wrath crossbows providing overwatch, it's still going to be a tough ask for the dwarves to continue to do this all on their lonesome. Flagrim moving forwards. Still, this defensive line has been completely unmoving and unyielding so far. The position of the engagement hasn't even changed, which is kind of rare. Javelins raining down. Further down off the hill. Hidden still has units that you can commit in reinforcements, of course, but a little bit scattered. I mean, so far, as we approach the halfway point, I would be far happier as a defender at this point. A few things to be concerned about going on into the later stages of the battle, but in a 4v4 as well, the here and now always takes a little bit more precedent than it would in a 5v3, where you always know the attackers are going to commit more later. That isn't necessarily the case in a 4v4, especially where the dwarves are concerned, where you know the manpower reserves are going to be a little bit lower. Meanwhile, Shadow Guard trying to move forward, and once again this Candish front line. We're seeing the Cand of old here, really. Like I said in the composition phases, the real differences with Cand are going to come about as a result of seeing how the cavalry reacts differently now. The infantry portion of Cand was always just fine, it did its job, and that's exactly what we're seeing in this battle as well. Alright, footmen holding onto the front line just fine, and the Shadow Guard proving to be just a little bit too fragile. Meanwhile, Sapphire Bladesmen, they have been sent forward, but Cand still with reinforcements able to be sent. Strong crossbows. Trying to offer that support. I mean, that level of damage that quickly could be the sort of thing to allow Filler back into this fight, but even if Filler were to dig out a victory from here, it would be a highly Pyrrhic one, surely. You strong crossbow man. Shadow bows as well. Rangers, of course, not quite the same unit that they once were, but that base damage is still going to be pretty useful, especially against stuff like Variad Warriors, the Brotherhood of the Shadows, of course, the Candish Assassins. Same kind of unit as the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen we've already seen. Over here, the Dwarves not yet ready to recommence their assault in earnest. The Ironfoot crossbows, clearly that's what Y2K's new tactic is, to try and take the slower approach, try and get the crossbows in there to soften the enemy up, to try and equalise the level of kills that have been inflicted so far, but the only problem with doing that is you're going to need to put the crossbows in harm's way in order to get into a good position. And even if you do, crossbow to crossbow, the dwarves of course have better ones, but Rhun would still take completely even trades between the two groups, I think. Given how the battle has already gone, Dwarven miners will almost certainly instantly rout in this kind of situation. I'm not really sure what the play here is. Ironfoot Warriors, a couple of units of them, heading further northward now. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen revealed themselves, but high-end spears, armor-piercing Shadow Guard, Guildsmen, javelins close by. Ironfoot Warriors are a very efficient unit for what they are, but there's no way that they're really going to make too many inroads in this particular environment. There's Gamprim here as well, which I didn't even notice, blending in nicely with the Scion Rune. Something has to give though. Maybe some sort of Hail Mary already in this fight is necessary. Perhaps. Flagrim on the way forward as well. Very prepared defence this. The top of the settlement meanwhile. Saleno still, as it stands, the only one to have made any real inroads thus far. Small matter of his crossbows as well, managing to hit some of the Mordor defenders that Medexa still has available. Some very depleted Ironfoot Warriors going to be dealt with by the RHUNIC. Further back, Runic infantry. For crossbows as well. Do they have the angle? The RHUNIC shadow bows still maintaining discipline so far. What will they be shooting at? Axe throwers maybe? Going after some of the infantry. I mean, Sons of Durin would represent a pretty good target for the RHUNIC shadow bows. Throwing axes from the dwarves, however. The Ironfoot warriors, it says defeat seems certain, although I think they should be just fine. Ironfoot crossbows that are out of ammunition as well, obviously not quite as strong as their dedicated melee infantry brethren, but still. There goes what is the Runic general, and you can tell because the Runic general is actually the Dalian one. For the attackers. King Brand marching with the Easterlings is a weird one, but there you have it. Filler. His ranged unit's getting chased backwards now into more open terrain. Dragon's Wrath crossbows represent still a real danger for Cand, but the infantry portion of Filler's assault pretty much spending itself. There goes the the bouncing projectiles of the... Am I going to hit something way over there? No, fortunately. Hidden manages to avoid unexpected betrayal from his ally. Hidden starting to make more inroads now, though. The benefit often we see to attackers struggling for a long period in a battle is they do tend to have more manpower reserves to call upon. And now perhaps this Runic army can start to try and see some actual movement on this side of the settlement. This has been an incredibly grindy choke point for both sides, but that suits the defenders' purposes more so than the attackers. Nothing left over here either, so Cand can focus their full attention up front. Brotherhood of the Shadows in behind enemy lines, chasing down units, getting in the way. I mean, to be fair, Zalhain's army is looking a little bit worse for wear as well. You could definitely say that Cand have had the better of the melee engagement, but the Dragon's Wrath crossbows are strong enough that they could make the difference. So too with the Storm Guard, however. Over yonder, what do we have? Ironfoot pikes moving forward. Are we seeing a little bit more now? Still, the other side, that one unit of Ironfoot warriors didn't really make any inroads whatsoever. Defeat seems certain for Rhun, which I find difficult to believe. I mean, the support of the crossbows hitting with a few of their projectiles, and then the pikes also reinforcing the front line. We mentioned early on how the pikes could be so important, the only army on the field to have access to such a unit, and yet so far they haven't really been able to lay down too much of their effectiveness from what we've seen. But maybe as the battle wears on, the late game can be where they really shine. Even fight over here allegedly. In terms of numbers it's not, but the quality actually from the defenders, these upgraded temple executioners proving to be a worthy foe for the dwarves to sink their teeth into. Obsidian Guard here, who have been damaged significantly as a result of their targeting from the Temple Guard. There's also the small matter of those Sons of Durin in here as well, armour piercing. Always going to be useful against the Orcish factions. Their craftsmanship may not be the best, but that armour is still their primary means of keeping themselves alive as a general rule. Not so much the case with the Temple Executioners, but still. Time for axe throwers in place, offering a little bit of support. There's a bridge over here at the rear end of the settlement, but it doesn't really lead anywhere. It would merely lead to the same problems that Y2K has encountered so far. Fortaleno still represents the attacker that's had the best time of it on the field so far, and still perhaps the best opportunity to push further into the settlement. Hidden though as well. Also from a player's perspective, it can be kind of difficult to judge. You're going to have to use the flare, as it were, the little button in Medieval 2 that highlights hostile and friendly units, if you're Rhun versus Rhun here, to see where the front line actually is. You can tell, however, based on where some of the units are facing and based on how far into the formation they've started to burrow, the situation could be a little bit worrying for them. And then, down over here, Dragon's Wrath Crossman being engaged in melee, unfortunately for Filler. That's not what he would have wanted to see. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. And they are strong enough to the point where they should be able to overcome the Neurads that have already been in combat for a bit, warmed up as they are. Ariag Bowman, a couple of units of them, trying to bring down the Shadow Bows. Melee prowess of the Shadow Bows a little bit higher, but the engagement shape is not really great for them, and they are shaken as a result. Main problem, of course, is going to be that Filler is not going to have anything at his disposal. There's those crossbows, which if he can get them into position, maybe is the answer, but he's not going to have anything in melee that is going to be able to lay a glove on a unit of Storm Guard which have been kept fresh for this very eventuality. And the artillery crew being killed as a result. Another unit, the Fountain Guard, have now got pretty much the same setup as the Storm Guard. This rather bizarre sort of halberd, shock infantry hybrid, more of like an aggressive polearm unit as opposed to a regular halberdier, and yet still devastating as they are, they should be able to finish off all that they perceive. It's going to be all up to this one unit of Eastron crossbows as to... Well, they actually have got a decent little shot there. Maybe. Whoever wins over here, it's not going to have too much of an impact in the battle as a whole, I think, because whoever does win is not going to have that much left at all. Erebor Legionaries fighting hard. I mean, this Runic front line is still just fine. Dragon's Wrath crossbows going to try and get into position with their splinter shot rounds, which we haven't actually seen directly yet. Erebor, however, also facing a bit of a counter-attack here. Flag Rim and Shadow Guard once again bringing a fairly hefty amount of armour piercing to bear against Erebor, twinning that as well with some flaming shot. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. The Dwarves' quality still allowing them some margin for error over here, in spite of how the fight has gone so far. At the back of the settlement, a whole brick of Mordor orcs still here, still blocking any further gains Erebor may have been hoping to make. The Ironfoot Axe Throwers doing their best. The Guildsmen, the Dragon's Wrath crossbows. They don't have Splinter Shot by the looks of things. Could have sworn that was getting restored. Are they merely high-end crossbows now? It's kind of a rare unit in and of itself. And even so, I mean, it doesn't really matter because that is going to be very, very effective. The final unit of infantry that Erebor can commit forwards back here has now done so. The Ironfoot Axe Throwers trying to help shore things up. Mordor, however, with that range support, may very well have recovered the northern defence as well. And all of a sudden, the emphasis is going to have to be put on other front lines. Are the Runic rebels over here going to be able to make anything happen? Doesn't look like it. It looks like they're running out of steam as well. Partially, I'm sure, because the defending Carmel's chosen it here as well. Strong crossbows very close, as are the Shadow Bows. But still, this engagement it's moved a little bit at the very least, but still wedged in that one choke point. The one over here, the Storm Guard, it's a huge bombards. I think, yeah, the whole of that crew has been destroyed. These strong crossbowmen, if they can reposition themselves, they may be able to do yet more damage to the Storm Guard, who are now all bloodied up as a result of those bolts hitting them. Dragon's Wrath crossbows, I mean, they're strong in melee, but not quite on the level with the Candish units they're facing down now. Need to be pretty careful here, and Zelhane, no fool, sees the danger that these strong crossbows represent and pulls some of the units in front to prevent them from having the easiest shot in the world, though they will still get a volley off. Well, that was the general for a second then, but it is not. That's the general. The Red Storm Guard trying to burrow into what remains of the Dragon's Wrath crossbows. I mean, certainly the Eastron crossbowmen are now the main threat because they still have that ammunition to them, but as has already been mentioned, Shadowbow is going to be victorious there. I mean, maybe Filler will get the most minor of victories. There goes the other Runic rebel general. Sons of Durin defeat seems certain, still not really able to get a full grip on this engagement, the dwarves. Every time they've gone in, they've been sent packing again. Rhun, very good about giving Erebor a bit of space, maybe a little bit too much space to be comfortable with, and then very quickly counter-attacking when they see a good opportunity to catch some units off balance. And again, sending single units of Ironfoot pikes like this, never really going to result in anything good. And unfortunately for his allies, Y2K needs to be able to do something here. The dwarves in the north of the settlement are running out of steam. They're not going to be able to overcome what remains of Mordor and Rhun there. Even if Filler is to be victorious, like I said, he'll have like 20 men left. And the Runic rebels over on the other side don't look as though they're going to be able to push through that opening choke point at all, with what they have remaining to them. The dwarves over here, again though, they don't really have enough left either by the looks of things. Flagrim right in and amongst things. I mean, the Obsidian Guard will certainly have what it takes to kill the Flagrim. Crossbows still hoping to do the business. Eastron crossbows as well. Maybe now's the time for Rhun to try and squash the dwarves in one fell swoop. Sons of Durin, and there are the Dragon Slayers in here as well, 39 of them at that. So even though this engagement does look fairly grim for them, when you actually consider the Nazgul are in there, that would also go some way to explaining why the Dwarven assault in the north has started to falter. You know how powerful they can be, but with Dragon Slayers, Obsidian Guard, Sons of Durin, these units as well, Nar Rim, Balkoth Tribesmen, the pole arms are really going to be Rhun's saving grace here, as well as the Dragon's Wrath crossbows in melee. This carpet of dead bodies, similar colour schemes for, or darker colour schemes for Mordor and Erebor, but there goes an Erebor general. Y2Ks as well, I think. But yes, in spite of a pretty tough opening from Medexa, I think a little bit of support he got from those heavy-hitting Runic projectile units and the sheer numbers that Mordor are able to bring to the equation as well, and salvage this engagement here in the north. There's still 10,000 frames left, so perhaps all is not lost. I mean, there's still the small matter of these Dragon Knights. A unit of cavalry of this calibre in the late game can be scary, but with the amount of anti-cav that they still have at their disposal, I think they should be okay. Over here, you know, the Dragon Knights pushing through this front line. Hidden's units. There goes the Womb Raiders general. Quality is going to have to be the name of the game here for the dwarves. It's been a tough engagement for Y2K, and in fairness to him, the early game didn't really set him up all that well in terms of how it worked out, but can stuff like the Dragon Slayers smash Erebor back into contention here? Obsidian Guard going to try and finish off the Dragon's Wrath crossbowman. If it comes down to very, very small numbers of units facing off against one another once more, though, then the fact that Nazgul is still in the field means we could see something quite similar to last time, where the Nazgul are simply too much. Blacklock Engineers are still over there. I mean, having a look at the engagement out front, Canned are going to be victorious. Well deserved, I think, from Zelhain. I liked how aggressive Villa was, but ultimately it was aggression that was maybe a little bit too clumsy, if that makes any sense at all. Norads. 15 Storm Guard at this late stage as well is actually a fairly substantial little force as well. Saw some flaming projectiles make landfall in the distance over here. Is Hidden finally going to have his time in the sun here? I'm not sure. Cummel's Chosen still alive and still doing their thing. 13 of them. They've been far more effective as a brick in a defensive wall than they were at being an aggressive bludgeon that Filler tried to use his as early on. Further along, Shadowbow's doing their thing. Point blank arrow fire. Needs must in desperate times for the attackers, I suppose. And now out of ammunition, pulling out their sidearms. Everyone will have to do their bits. Victory seems certain. And Mordor, completely victorious here in the north. 10 Temple Executioners remain. There's still a dwarf? No, it's just one son of Durin. And he's routing, dressed in the garb of the Obsidian Guard. Make our way back to the other Dwarven engagement, the one that is still alive. Eastron crossbowmen moving in. Scion Rim facing down the Ironfoot Pikes, who have not been the tour de force still that I would have expected them to be, although perhaps here in the late game, still 62 of them remaining, with manpower a little bit more sparse. Maybe now they can finally do the business. Flag Rim helping to bring down what remains of the Ironfoot crossbows over here. Dragon Slayers, 14 of them, still trucking along. The damage they can deal, of course, so effective. 2 Dragon's Wrath crossbows remain, 6 Obsidian Guard. Scattered remnants at this point. The Moon Raider still has a few more numbers left to give, and especially if we see the arrival of that unit of Nurad Storm Guard over here. I'm not sure it actually will make its way over here. I think perhaps more emphasis is going to be placed over on trying to keep this defensive position completely solid, although with Mordor already over here, I don't really think there's any great need for anything further. There's already a few Candish units actually who are actually broken and fighting to the death, amusingly. Temple Guard, Temple Executioners, yeah, I think with the quality that the defenders have left, they have managed to bring the margin of victory a little bit closer to the attackers as the battle has worn on, but ultimately I think the initial engagements and how they went, putting them at a deficit, they haven't quite been able to completely make up for that. Mordor Chosen. Flagrim have proven to be a pretty efficient line infantry unit once more as well. Nothing too different to what we would have seen in the last patch in this battle, in all fairness. We haven't really seen, because of the confined nature of the battlefield, where we've seen the guildsmen, they've done quite well, but we haven't really seen them fill the exact role that perhaps they would normally. Where are the Nazgul? They still weaved in and amongst this force, or have they actually been sent over to the other side? Victory seems certain for the Pikes. I mean, that's something, I suppose. Amusingly enough though, only one Dragon Slayer remains. That was a result of... I guess they just ran out of steam. Or a few halberdiers in this little engagement after all, so yeah, I think the dwarves are ultimately going to lose straight up over here. Very close the margin in the end, but considering the difference in quality, still 2 Dragon Knights, but again, this battle was always going to be quite difficult to use a unit of cavalry like that in. Uruk halberdiers. So it is going to be one of the Runic rebel armies, I think, which is going to be the last ones standing. Kumul shadow bows. Here are the Storm Guard as well. Just this one choke point. The Hidden and 2 times have been fighting in for the entire battle, pretty much. At the very least, Hidden had a little bit of a foray against Cand as well, across that bridge further south, but a very, very straight up battle for these two to fight in. And impressive as well that the Carmel's Chosen is still alive to any capacity. They've been involved in this fight for a long time. I mean, resilience is exactly what you want from this kind of unit, but still, considering the pressure they've had to put up with, 8 Nazgûl still remain. So yeah, the battle's overall result is not really going to be in doubt any longer. The percentages are still fairly even, however. It does go to show, I think, that the sheer numbers that the defenders had at their disposal. We've seen numerous defenders' tactics work out pretty well in both of the last 2 new patch preview battles we've done. Do the dwarves have anything remaining? They do. The Ironfoot Pikes are still alive. So actually, maybe a minor victory, but still, Y2K probably would end up winning this one with just these Ironfoot Pikes. The assistance from that one remaining Dragon Knight proving to be rather helpful, which does of course mean we're going to have to wait for all of these units to transit across the map to finish that one pike unit off. In fact, I think this is a situation that does indeed call for ×2 speed. We're starting to see routing? No. I mean, there's no way out for Hidden. He may as well just stick in place and see what he can accomplish here. I think losing taste for battle is somewhat moot when you're all dead. Again, that quality that Mordor still has at their disposal definitely will have helped them against the Dwarven pressure they faced earlier on as well. Interesting battle this though. It's more so for showing the fact that mirror matches are now actually an option. Also, it's the first full map I think we've seen made by the Wind Raider, so that's a good thing. Someone else making maps and content for the game. Is that the end of this? I believe it is. Which means the Ironfoot Pikes facing off against a unit of Uruk Halberds, which has come over here in an attempt to try and root them out.
1,000 curses. Our men are running like cowards. Rally them before victory runs away with them.
Uruk Halberds gone. It's going to have to be ×6 speed, isn't it? Ironfoot Pikes, 16 remain. As soon as something substantial hits them, they are going to rout, I would assume. exhausted as they are. But still, I may have run out of things to say about this battle at this point, as is often the way when there's a situation like this that has developed, but a neat little battle this. Atmosphere-wise as well, I think the sandstorm and the fact that the settlement is sort of half buried adds a good amount to it. Oh yeah, the Nazgul will rout them in double quick time, surely. That will surely be the end of them. Why are they running away? Like, what purpose does this serve? Trying to go after the Storm Guard? Get an extra kill or two? There we go. And that is it. 2% is the difference in the end, so it's why the fact that I think the defenders were kind of constantly at an advantage. In the end, the margin wasn't all that substantial. But there we have it. So a big thank you to the Womb Raider for creating this one and for sending it in. Obviously, stuff on the new patch as well is always very much welcome. Albeit, we are now to the point where I'm sure that because it's a little bit more imminent than it has been at many points in the past, I am going to be trying to get through my backlog of old patch stuff as well, so that we don't have an absolutely ginormous crossover period where we're still dealing with a whole bunch of stuff from the old version of the game. So that is going to start to become a little bit of a factor as well. Even kill counts across most of the forces here today. I mean, the attackers had, generally speaking, less men per army than the defenders, which is not too surprising given the fact that it was a Dwarven-led attack in many ways, and then it's sort of like fully Orc and Evil men on the defence. But yeah, mirror matches, it's the sort of thing which is going to be worth keeping an eye on as we make our way forwards into the next version of the game. Civil wars, direct civil wars, may well become a little bit more of a normality. Let's see what did the damage for the defending Runic armies then. Dragon's Wrath crossbows did okay for themselves for the Womb Raider. We have Eastrom crossbows, a big part of the defence of course, and even the regular archers I thought the Rim did really rather well. Scion Rim acting as that defensive bulwark as they often do. The Shadow Guard against the Dwarves were particularly effective at getting those charges. Gamprim as well, considering the pikes weren't a real threat early, the halberds were able to situate themselves quite nicely. And the Guildsman getting a good amount of kills, which is good to see. And then we have 2 times as well. His crossbowmen far more effective, but that's not too surprising given that choke point in the north where they really helped bail Mordor out of the initial pressure they were under. And then of course the Mordor numbers helped to do that as well. Cummel's Chosen doing nicely, Tribesmen, maybe higher kills as a general rule over here, and most of it coming from those crossbows. So that speaks to the fact that 2 times his position's a little bit more static, a little bit easier perhaps to get those crossbow damage values off into the enemy. But still, good returns nonetheless. And yeah, nice to see another replay on this version of the game. I don't know exactly where this is going to fall in the schedule because as it has been, I'm sort of inserting them into the month or so's backlog that I've already got uploaded, so it won't be right at the end of that, but it will probably be about 2 weeks from the point of recording, so I don't know, that'll probably be around the start or the middle of May, I would have assumed, is when this one will probably come out. There's still plenty of stuff from the old version which I'm still trying to get through, including several custom maps still which have been given to me by Tommy, so they're going to be coming out in the next couple of months as well, sort of littered throughout because there's quite a few of them. And there's also some content from the updated version of Silmarillion as well, so plenty to be getting on with. Trying to sort of dig my way through this backlog as efficiently as I'm able to, but obviously that's easier said than done given my schedule, because I will be going away for, I'm sure, another 3-week trip for work at some point in the near future, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. Hopefully that won't last for too much longer as soon as I've got everything sorted out, but again, that's a matter for a different time. But yeah, big thank you to the Womb Raider once again, big thanks to all the players. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.